So hello everyone, my name is Saija Benjamin and welcome to listen to my online lecture about young individuals who are growing up between countries and cultures and languages. The content of this lecture is based on my ongoing PhD research on mobile youth. And here is a little summary about what I'm going to cover within the next half an hour or so. So please move on to the slide 2. So first, I would like to introduce myself. I'm going to tell a little bit about my background, and then briefly about the research, and then finally about the actual experiences of the mobile youth. Yes, so first, I would like to introduce myself and give some context for my research. I was born and raised in Finland. At the university, I studied education and graduated as a primary school teacher. However, for the past 4 years, I've been working on my PhD research and writing and lecturing about identity and international mobility. A little bit about my private side. My husband is French Egyptian, and together we've lived in 5 different countries, mainly because of his job. Today I'm joining you from France, where we have been living since 2 years now. We have 3 children, and the first 2 of them were born in Finland. And when they were 2, 3, and 5, we moved to Prague, the capital of Czech Republic, and where the boys went to an international school. I have worked in international schools before, but now I was looking at things from a different perspective as a mother, so it was quite interesting. And that's where I got the idea for my research. You can move on to the next slide, please. So in the huge international school in Prague, I got to know many other families who had moved because of the other parents' job, and their children had attended many different international schools. I thought about my very stable childhood and the fact that I lived in the same house for 20 years. I had the same friends and the same classmates for many, many years. I discussed with the other parents in the school, and I realized that also they had been growing up like me in the same very stable context. However, now they were raising up their children in very different contexts, in a very mobile context. And then my husband's company told us that they would probably transfer us somewhere else after the 3 years in Prague. And I became curious to know, how is it for the children to change countries, schools, and their home just when they are settled here in Prague? How about the children who have moved already many times? What are their experiences and feelings about it? Slide 4, please. So there were lots of books about mobile childhood in the school library, and very quickly I got to know that these mobile children had an official name. They were called the third culture kids. I got really interested and started to read more and more, and I learned that the third culture kids originally means children who live in a culture, let's say the American culture, and who move to another country with another culture, let's say India. So for these children, the American culture represents the first culture. The Indian culture is the second culture. However, as the children cannot fully live according to the American culture because they are now in India, and they cannot live exactly according to the Indian culture either because they are Americans, so they end up creating this so-called third culture, like a hybrid combination of these 2 first cultures. But as I read on, something started to disturb me in this third culture kid literature. I looked around me in the international school, and what I saw was mostly kids who had never lived somewhere long enough that it could be called their first culture. And if their stay in one country normally lasted to 2 to 4 years, it was not long enough for them to grow into that local culture either. So if there's no first culture to start with and no second culture to compare the first culture with, was there anything created that could be called a third culture? Slide 5, please. At the same time, I became very curious of the whole notion of culture. What do these books mean by culture? How is it defined and by who? Many children in these international schools are mixed, meaning that their parents might come from different backgrounds when it comes to nationality, religion, language, or ethnicity. These children are individuals who are growing in a hybrid mix of the values, worldviews, traditions, education, and life experience of their parents. What is their culture? I think no one can really say from the outside. This is when I started to question the whole idea of culture as defined by different descriptions. The Finnish culture, the Latino culture, the Muslim culture. All these old categories talking about culture, religion, or ethnicity no longer reflect the realities of the societies or the individuals therein. However, even in the international schools that have so many children with so complex backgrounds, these cultural categories are still used in educational practices. The pupils are often asked to represent their country and talk about their culture, even though they are not sure what these things mean for them, and who even knows if these are the categories that these children want to be members of. A passport or a nationality doesn't mean that the child identifies with that country or that she knows anything about it. My children have 3 nationalities, and I still remember their confusion when they were asked to represent their country and carry a flag. What would they choose without hurting anyone's feelings? However, the books about TCK's third culture kids were pretty encouraging. These children were often described as flexible cosmopolitans and open-minded citizens of the world who feel at home everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But were they really? I decided to put all these books and descriptions about TCKs aside and look into the experiences, their real experiences of growing up between countries and cultures. And that's how I ended up here talking about mobile childhoods. You can go to the slide 6, please. So now I will briefly tell you about how I conducted my research, and then we can get to the interesting parts, which is the actual experiences of the youth I was interviewing. So I selected as informants for my study young people who are between 13 and 17 years old. I wanted to study adolescents because they are at an age where questions like who am I and where do I come from and where do I belong become important. I thought it would be a very fruitful age to discuss their lives because at that time their experiences of mobility are still fresh and raw and their identities are in the making, so to say. So all informants have experienced 2 or more international moves by the time they are adolescents and after the age of 5, because before that they usually don't remember much about them. And to add one layer of complexity, I chose individuals with nationally mixed parental heritage only. The data was gathered in Prague, in 3 different international schools, and in 1 French school. My study was guided by the following research question. How do youth make sense of their experiences of international mobility? If you would like to know more about my methods and the analysis, I'm happy to answer your questions at the end of the lecture. Slide 7, please. Here are the informants. I chose 8 of them for the analysis, and here you can see their pseudonyms and their origins, which are really complex, and then their age and in how many countries they've been living by the time of the interview. Slide 8. So, what did I find out? I will now guide you through the results and present like a summary of the main findings. So during the interviews, the mobile youth made sense of their experiences of mobility, and based on my interpretation of their stories, I was able to identify 4 main themes that seemed to be very central in informants' experiences. They all talked about what it is like to lead an international life, how they cope with the changing life environment, schools and friends. They talked about how they see themselves and who and what other people and places they feel connected or disconnected to. And all these themes are listed here in this slide. I will go through these themes one by one and illustrate them with direct quotes from the participants. And these quotes will be written in the slide so that it's easier for you to follow. Slide 9, please. So, all informants have moved internationally at least twice by the time they're adolescents, some of them even up to 5 times. Because they have not experienced what it is to grow up in one place, moving and restarting are normal things in their life, the only way of life they are familiar with. But how do they experience the many moves? This theme talks about what kind of thoughts and feelings are involved. And first, some examples of how these youth make sense of moving. Michael says, so it's kind of awkward period between really knowing a place and kind of growing into that place and just travel to see the place. I always feel like it's not quite enough time to get settled, but it's too much time to just, go and leave without unpacking the boxes. And Enzo says, there's always a difference between traveling and moving. I guess to the question, what would you like to be called? I don't think traveler would be the best, because when someone is traveling, it's like trips I had in Paris and in London, in Berlin. But like moving to Czech Republic was not traveling. It was more like life. And then finally, Joanna summarizes, when you move every few years like that, it's just part of your life. We've been going through this all these years. Slide 10. The mobile youth life is not predictable, and any plans they make, they might change because of a new move. And because these youth move because of their parents' job and not by their own choice, there's sometimes an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, like a feeling of lack of agency or control over their own lives. And these quotes talk about that. Julie says, but it's my father, what the work of my father says. We don't decide, they decide. And then Max says, my dad once again decided, let's move somewhere else, and we moved to China. Slide 11. International moving from one place to the next can have different meaning for each informant and for each move. It can be experienced as an end that forces one to close doors and say goodbye. So in this case, moving is felt like a rupture of something comfortable and nice. As Max says, I was not happy about the move from China to the Czech Republic at all, because I had all these friends, I was popular, I liked hanging out with them after school, and I would go to school and I had friends in every grade. The move can also be lived as a neutral event that just takes one from one place to another, like Vanessa experienced once. Well, here I hardly remember the move, because to me it felt quite the same as Holland, so I don't think it just felt like moving houses. Then again, transition of the move can be also felt as a relief, like an escape from an uncomfortable situation where one finds oneself living in. As settling in is not always easy and friends can be hard to find, a new transition may feel like convenient and be almost like a looked after event, like for Julie it was. But I'm happy when I can't wait to go somewhere else. I'm obliged to leave one day, can't stay here. Slide 12, please. All the informants recognize this feeling of temporality of things. They are aware that their experiences in different places and with different people are always limited by time. There's a beginning and an end, although the exact length of the time may be uncertain. Most informants view their life being built out of blocks of time in space, like the years in Peru, the years in Prague, the years in Paris, and all the people that were included in those years. The lifespan of their friendship is often as long as their stay in one place. Efforts to keep contact, they fade away when new friends and new things come along. It never lasts, some of them say. After the move, some youth just seem to turn the page. They join a new school and get new friends. And this might be sometimes quite difficult to accept. Like Anna says, one thing that I always think about is that they may have like the same friends since they were really, really young, and I don't have that. Because since I've lived in different countries, you kind of lose contact with people that you were friends with when you are younger. So I guess I will never have that like friend that I've been friends with since we're really young. And it's kind of sad in a way. And Vanessa says, it's like the idea that you make friends and they may be really, really good friends and then they leave. And it's really hard to keep contact even with the internet, you know. It's hard to keep contact, so it never happens. Slide 13, please. We now move on to the theme, press restart and play. So how do the youth manage all the big changes in their lives? It seems like the informants, they have developed different strategies to cope with the changes, although these strategies seem to be quite unconscious, actually. The strategies are used to get over the initial shock of the news about moving, and then to get through the first stages of transition, and then finally to get to the calm period of settlement. In my analysis, I noticed that the informants focus their attention on different things in order to cope with the changes. They may focus their attention on the advantages of mobility, on the positive things and emotions such as excitement, curiosity, and joy, or they may think about moving as an adventure or a chance to discover new places and new people. Like Ryan says, because moving around, especially to different countries, you get to meet tons of different people and see and experience different cultures, and that's going to help me a lot in life because it helps me see a different perspective on other people and stuff. Slide 14, please. And with experience, some informants may focus their attention on the rationale of moving. So they kind of know how to play the game. And it makes the transition process more predictable. Each move is still unique and experienced differently, but previous moving experience gives you an idea of the necessary stages and steps that you need to go through within transition. If you say goodbye to friends once, it makes you keep in mind that it will probably happen again sooner or later. Like Joanna says, when we move, I'm going to be angry and everything. But once you're there, it's actually interesting. And so I'm happy to have been there. But it's always like that. Enzo says, I used to have friends there and moved here and got new friends. So it's kind of a routine that I learned to deal with. And then Michael, and throughout being in Prague, I've tried to keep in mind that I am going to be moving again in just over a year and a half. So slide 15. And one way to cope with the changes is to dream. Dreaming relieves stress and helps coping with the present situation. Many informants, they dream of their future and organizing their lives as they would like to live it, when they have the power to do it. Some informants like Anna dream about stability, of never ever moving again. Like she says, oh, I've kind of decided that I don't ever want to move again after that, like after I decide to settle in one place. But I don't know, life is a bit crazy, so I might end up moving again, but I don't really want to. I just want to stay in one place. Slide 16. Then we move on to the theme, the mobile me, that talks about their identifications and self-understandings. Living abroad and moving represents a lifestyle that the informants are very familiar with. Yet for them, living abroad is a very curious notion because most informants have spent their whole lives in different countries. Only a few of them can actually pinpoint a home country. Living abroad is the only way of life most of them know. Like Max, he has lived in many countries in Asia and Europe, and he argues, I don't think that the fact that I lived in China means much. Lots of people think it does. I don't really think that where someone is, where they lived, is that important. But what is important, however, for Max is the social capital he has gained during these years. Max feels that it's not the countries per se that have shaped his personality, but the experiences and understandings he has acquired. And he says, so if someone's from some small town in Britain, okay, that's interesting. But if he's lived in America and Czech Republic and Germany, his opinion is somehow more intelligent. At adolescence, it becomes normal to draw lines between people who are like you and those who are different. This is a way to understand where you stand, who you are, and who you are definitely not. The mobile youth become conscious of their distinctive lifestyle and start comparing themselves with their stable peers, who often become to represent the other and who function as a mirror reflecting the specificities of the international lifestyle. And that is here explained by Vanessa. She had moved in many times in her childhood, and she's convinced about the advantages of mobility for her personal development. She draws a clear line between her and the stable youth and characterizes these others as people who have not moved around. And she says, well, aside from like being open-minded and everything, I think having experienced so many different cultures, you're more accepting. I think if you go to a certain culture, like they're in this bubble and you can really feel it if you've never been moving around. You can feel when you go to a certain place how isolated they are and how they only know like about themselves and how little they know about the world. And that's really annoying. Slide 18, please. When Vanessa is characterizing an international mobile person, she's actually describing how she sees herself and the people she includes in the us. For her, open-mindedness, acceptance, and cultural awareness are part of her worldview, and that has been shaped by mobility. She contrasts these features with isolation, ignorance, and narrow-mindedness that for her are characterizing the worldviews of the geographically stable people who live in the bubble and ignore the world beyond their immediate surroundings. Slide 19, please. Another common aspect for the informants is the notion of in-betweenness or sometimes of bothness. These youth are in transition not only geographically from one country to another, but also biologically. They are growing up from childhood to adulthood. And ethnographically, they are also they fall into two or more categories, their national origins, ethnicities, home languages, religions, and so on. These categories are also used in educational practices in schools, including the international schools. However, many informants do not identify with the categories they are placed in according to their official memberships. They feel irritated if their identities are reduced to a few narrow categories that that are not representing their true self-understandings. For instance, French-American Joanna is frustrated if she's taken for a French one, while French is not something she regards as a meaningful identification for her. She says, I feel French in the sense that I speak French, I go to the French schools, I read French books, I love French literature, but I don't feel French. That's a part of me I don't really like, and I just can't refuse it because it's just me. However, Joanna would not say she's American either. She's trying to make sense of her dual nationality and what it means for her. She says, I may be French-American, but sometimes I feel that I'm so much more than that. I don't want to be mean by saying that a little, but just being French seems kind of plain, or just being American seems kind of plain. I don't know, it's just, I'm not French, I'm not American, I'm both. Slide 20, please. So we're moving to the last theme, which is connecting emotional and interzones. And this theme speaks about how the mobile youth relate to their peers, origins, and the places they live in. And it's about their feelings of belonging and connectedness. One characterizing aspect for most informants is the feeling of disconnectedness. And this is most often experienced in relation to the local society and its people, especially when the language barrier is high. They feel it's difficult, sometimes impossible, to get familiar with the local people and become part of the society. Vanessa says, but I can't have a full conversation with a Czech person, and it's really annoying because that would make it feel more like home, I think. But since we're so isolated here, like I'll go out and if I need something, I'll usually need a translator. So it's like a barrier between people, and if you can't like be with the people, you don't feel a part of the country. Slide 21, please. The frequent transitions and short stays in one country may make it difficult for the youth to follow the local trends and tendencies and behaviors, the latest topics of discussion that the local youth embrace. Joanna has dramatic experiences of being the odd one out and being bullied for being different by her stable peers at school. And this is how she interprets her experience. They were just putting me in a corner and leaving me there like a skeleton. I don't know, like an old thing that isn't always lying, always cheating, always doing stupid things. Slide 22. However, if the informants are not always on track about the local tendencies, they may know even less about their official countries. All informants have a dual national heritage from their parents, and their passports reflect these origins, but they may hold any deeper meanings for them. Many of them are migrants in second or third generation already, and this is one of the reasons why the concepts of birth country, home country, nationality, homeland may be less significant for them as it may be, for example, for a traditional immigrant. A sense of disconnectedness is actually experienced in relation to one's passport countries quite often. Being officially from somewhere creates a pressure to know that place, which for many participants it's not the case. Italian Peruvian Anna and French American Vanessa reflect on these feelings of not really knowing their official countries here. Anna says, when people that are from only one country talk about their country, I just think like that they're lucky that they're just from one place and they know what that place is, even though they live somewhere else. And Vanessa says, I think it's also weird, it's like if you're from a country that you really like belong to, then you know a lot about the country and you probably know a lot about the culture. For example, if someone asks me something about France, like maybe in French schools, how do they do this? Or how does marriage work in France? Like I would have no idea in either one. Because if you have two like countries, you're not living in either of them, you don't know any of the inside. You feel you can't explain you can't educate people about your country as well, because you're not part of the country anymore. So yeah, so like if a teacher goes like, "You're French, what is it like in France?" I'm like, "I don't know." Let's go to the slide 23. However, the informants do have emotions and even patriotic feelings towards certain countries, although these are not necessarily their passport countries, but other places with powerful meanings attached to them. Sometimes the sense of connectedness is based on some abstract feelings that have nothing to do with the child's official memberships. Sometimes a parent's homesickness or nostalgia are contagious, and the child integrates these feelings as her own. For example, let's look at Anna's and Max's experiences. Anna was born in Switzerland, sorry, and holds Peruvian and Italian passports. She reflects on her national heritage. My grandparents left Italy after the World War II to go to Argentina, and my mom was born there. So she doesn't feel totally Argentinian either, but I do. But I don't feel Italian. I even lived there, but I don't. I just don't feel from there. So despite her origins, her nationality, the many years spent in Italy, and all the relationships she had there, Anna doesn't feel connected to Italy. Italian passport may be useful for traveling, but if Anna could decide, she would choose the Argentinian one. Argentina is the country where her grandparents immigrated and where her mother grew up. And in a way, Anna has internalized her mother's homesickness and nostalgia, and she has drawn an idealized picture of the country for herself. She says, "I really don't know. It's very strange because I never lived there. But it's very, like, it's just my place. I don't know why. I really don't know why." Slide 24, please. The sense of connectedness and identification can also be constructed through stories that are told in the family from one generation to the other. The awareness of belonging to a chain of generations and having one's own place in the family tree can be really empowering for the mobile youth. In spite of never having been there, New Zealand-born Max feels a strong connection to Norway, the birth country of his dad. Throughout his life, Max has heard stories about Norway told by his grandmother and his dad. And thus Norway has become in his mind to represent a place of rich family heritage. This is how he reflects on it. "I want to live in Norway. I suppose because my dad is from Norway, but I just want to live in Norway. I always want him to talk about Norway and his family from Norway. It's just things like that we owned a mountain and all of us lived there. And if you search my name into Google, every person you'll find is related to me. There's only one XX family in the world." Slide 25, please. The everyday lives of the young people that I interviewed evolve much around school and home. Even though all international schools are different, there are lots of similarities between them that support the new child getting familiar and comfortable in the new settings quite quickly. The international schools, they have this kind of a quite similar, familiar atmosphere that gives the children a feeling of continuity when they move from one school to another. So it's quite natural that most children that I interviewed, they feel that in an international school, they are actually locals. Vanessa says, I'm both French and American. I actually do feel that. But the country itself, I don't connect with the other American people or the other French people. I only connect with other people who don't really belong to a country. And Max says, yeah, it's definitely the school I miss the most. I don't miss China that much. And we all had similar experiences. We all had moved from country to country to country and then settled here. And because, well, we all had the same television and we all were interested in the same things, we all had things to relate to each other. Okay, we are now slowly coming towards the end of the presentation. And I hope you have learned something new about how these mobile children make sense of the different aspects in their lives. As we can see, the concept of third culture kids is not very suitable for describing these young people because their identities are so multidimensional and their experiences of mobility are so different in so many ways that it seems almost impossible to put these mobile into any given categories. And why should we? There is no one way of experiencing mobility or being as a mobile child. Slide 26, please. So my aim was to tell the stories of these particular young people in the hope of increasing a little bit our understanding of their experiences of growing up between different countries. But at the end, I think we'll just have to accept what Joanna says. People that don't live what we live don't understand. But what we do know is that the experiences of these mobile youth support the fact that knowing the nationalities, the family origins, or any other official labels of other people do not help us knowing the person any better. Each life trajectory is different. And I like what Taya Selassie says. She reminds that nationality is grounded in the notion of nation. But nations are just concepts. They are not real. They are invented. People don't come from a country. People do not come from a religion or ethnicity. These things do not tell much about who we really are. So what does tell about who we are and how we see ourselves? Let's move on to the slide 27. Selassie also says that one can take away my passport, but not my experience. Identity is experience. It is your experience where you're from. And I think this resonates very well with the way the young people in my study make sense of their lives. Thank you for listening. And now if you have questions, I'm very happy to answer. So there's a comment from someone. I am a third culture kid now in my 40s, but spent most of my youth in Southern Africa before going to Europe. Even in Africa was different because my parents are both from Europe and I instilled in me some of their values and norms. As a result, I never really fit into Europe. My wife is a third culture kid as she spent 7 years of her childhood in East Africa before returning to Finland. For her, it has always been difficult to make lifelong friends because of this moving around during critical times in childhood development. Now we have our own children, and so though we live in Finland, we try to teach our kids about their African roots and would like them to develop some sort of connection to there. And partly my wife. Exactly, this comment resonates very well with the experiences the youth in my study were having. Thank you for listening and commenting.